They call it Festung Europa, Fortress Europe. I look at these architectural blueprints, at these millions of tons of concrete we have woven into the sands of the French coast, believing that a gray wall of stone could stop the rising tide of history. But I, who have spent decades in war rooms studying the anatomy of defeat, know a terrible truth. A wall is only as strong as the man who keeps watch behind it. Our wall stretches 3,000 kilometers, and on the maps in Berlin, it looks like an unbroken, mighty red line of defiance. In reality, it is a string of lonely, cold bunkers where 17-year-old boys and old men with rheumatism stare into the fog of the channel, wondering if death will arrive with the first rays of the sun or if the ocean will simply swallow them in silence. We are not the masters of this coast. We are its most expensive prisoners, waiting for a verdict that was signed long ago in the silence of the Atlantic depths. Today is June 4th. In my suitcase, alongside top-secret documents, sits a pair of shoes, a birthday gift for my wife, Lucy. The irony is bitter, isn't it? The man the world knows as the Desert Fox, who survived the scorching sands of Africa and outsmarted British armies, is now practically fleeing his own front because the meteorologists, those prophets of the modern military, promised him the sea was too wild and the wind too fierce for any invasion. I look at the maps of Normandy one last time before leaving. Those beaches I obsessively filled with steel hedgehogs and mines. My soldier's intuition, that quiet voice at the back of my head, is screaming that something is wrong, that this silence is too perfect. But the reports say, no immediate danger, the storm is our best ally. I leave my men to the mercy of the weather, praying that the waves are indeed higher than Allied ambitions. If I am wrong, these shoes will become the most tragic and expensive birthday gift in the entire history of the German people. Here in Berchtesgaden, the air is so clean and still that the war feels like some distant, abstract fairy tale. Here, in the shadow of the mountains, the fates of millions are decided by whispers in hallways upholstered in heavy velvet. No one wants to be the messenger who breaks the Führer's sleep. No one dares to bring news that might spoil the idyll of this mountain morning. Our supreme commander sleeps a deep sleep under the influence of powerful sedatives, while around his door stands a guard of the highest level of arrogance and fear. Officers in the salons sip coffee and speak of Pas-de-Calais as the only logical target, completely ignoring every shadow moving toward the west on our intelligence maps. We have created a monstrous system where truth has become more dangerous than an enemy bullet, and loyalty is measured by the willingness to remain silent while the ground beneath our feet slowly turns to ash. That silence in the corridors of headquarters is not peace. It is the silence of a tomb slowly, noiselessly closing over us. Midnight has passed, and the sky above France has suddenly come alive, but not with stars or meteors. Thousands of engines hum in the blackness above our heads, that deep, metallic vibration that rattles your bones and cannot be mistaken for anything else in the world. Our radars flicker nervously, but the commanders in the field, bound by chains of indecision, hesitate to sound the alarm. Is this just a ruse? Are these just parachute dummies made of cloth and sand intended to confuse us? On the map in the headquarters at Cannes, the first black dots appear where we least expected them. In the marshes, in the dense forests, in the very backyards of our commands. Telephone cables have been severed with a single stroke of a knife, and with them, our last link to reality has vanished. For the first time in 4 long years, the invincible German army is deaf and blind, locked in its own house while the guests arrive uninvited and armed to the teeth. I, Alfred Jodl, hold a telephone receiver that feels as cold as ice in my hands, while my heart beats to the rhythm of catastrophe. From Normandy, only fragments of horror arrive, broken sentences speaking of thousands of ships and a sky that has turned black with wings. My hand hovers over the great strategic map where the 12th SS Panzer Division and the mighty Lehr Division are clearly marked. They are our only card, our iron fist that alone might have the strength to throw the Allies back into the cold ocean before they take root. But these divisions on paper do not belong to the General Staff. They belong exclusively to him, and he is still sleeping. If I move them without his express command, and it turns out this is just a great rouse before an attack on Calais, my life and my honor will be over before dawn. I choose the cold safety of protocol over the desperate salvation of the army in the field. I slowly hang up the receiver. Let them wait for the dawn. Let them wait for him. Let history record that we failed because we did not dare to wake the God we created ourselves. Dawn broke in shades of dirty gray and blood red. The fog pulled back like a curtain in a theater, revealing an armada the likes of which the human eye has not seen since the beginning of the world. On the beach in our headquarters, coldly named Omaha, my soldiers in Bunker 62 looked directly into the eyes of death literally rising out of the water. Our MG-42 machine guns fire without ceasing. The barrels are so hot they ignite the air around them, and the sand has become soaked with blood faster than the ocean can wash it away. On the map, that thin yellow line of the beach is now becoming a dark red stain, spreading uncontrollably into the interior. We kill them by the hundreds, but they come by the thousands. For every tank of theirs we destroy, 10 new ones appear on the horizon. This is not a battle. It is an industrial process of destruction against which our courage stands no chance. I race back through France, and the roads I once trod as a conqueror are now the graveyards of our dreams. Every minute of my absence has been paid for with the lives of men I swore to lead. I arrive too late. I look through my binoculars and see a devastating image. Mountains of supplies, thousands of jeeps, and endless columns of fresh soldiers unloading where just a few hours ago stood my invincible wall. My fortress was not torn down by enemy guns alone. It was undermined from within by the arrogance and blindness of those in Berlin who believe that war is won by drawing arrows on paper while men die in the mud on the ground. Our tactics have become a petrified fossil of the past, and Allied steel is the hammer that is currently crushing it into dust. Hours have passed. The sun is already high over Normandy, illuminating a chaos that no one can control anymore. Only now, the bedroom door in Berchtesgaden opens. The leader emerges, refreshed by sleep, while generals with trembling hands offer him reports that have been stale for hours. He looks at the map, but his eyes do not see reality. They see only his own infallibility. "Destroy them at the water's edge," he screams, as if his words could force time to run backward. The permission to move the Panzer divisions is finally signed. The ink is still wet while the first Allied units are already entering French villages. That signature, which this morning could have changed the fate of the world, is now just a worthless scrap of paper. The clocks have ticked away our time. Our elite panzers have finally moved, but the roads to the coast have become fire traps. On the map, it was a simple 2-hour march. In reality, it was a march through a hell where the sky constantly spits fire. Every bridge is blown. Every grove hides Allied fighter bombers hunting us like game. The tanks we cherished like jewels now burn by the roadside, never having fired a single shell toward the sea. Our generals in warm offices did not understand that war is no longer fought only on the ground, but in a sphere of industrial supremacy that has stolen the sun from us and left us to fight in the darkness of our own logistical ruin. I look at the map on the wall of the headquarters in Paris. Those thin, broken lines that were supposed to keep the Allied invasion nailed to the sea are now completely torn, like spiderwebs in the wind. My officers still move wooden markers out of habit, but I know those units no longer exist in a physical sense. They remain there, in trenches flooded by the tide, buried under tons of sand and steel. We are no longer just lying to the enemy with false information. We have begun to lie to ourselves, calling every new defeat an elastic defense or a strategic shortening of the lines. The truth is simple. D-Day was not a battle. It was a verdict on a system that forgot that soldiers are humans, not figures on a madman's chessboard. Night falls again over Normandy. But this is not the same France we knew this morning. The smell of burning and salt seeps into every pore. On the map, the Allied beachhead is no longer a small thing. It is a cancer that will spread to all of Europe tomorrow. While they forge plans for counterattacks in Berlin that will never happen, here on the ground, the soldiers know the truth. They look at the sky and wait for the dawn, knowing it will bring more ships, more planes, and more proof that our faith in invincibility was just a house of cards knocked down by one man who slept too long. Trust is a weapon that can only be lost once, and we lost it today between breakfast and lunch. Officers at the front no longer look at the telephone with hope, but with contempt. They realize their lives were sacrificed not for tactics, but for protocol and the vanity of those who fear waking a dictator. Our army, which once marched with the precision of a watch, is now just a mass of lost men fighting for survival in a war that was lost in a bedroom. The map of Europe is not just changing in the color of its lines tonight. It is changing in the very core of its existence. I sit in the darkness of my bunker and listen to the distant thunder of Allied artillery. That sound has become the steady heartbeat of our ruin. I think of all those moments when we could have turned the tide, of all those warnings we threw into the trash because they did not fit the Führer's vision of the world. We dug this pit for ourselves, cementing it with the fear of authority. Today we learned that no amount of fortification can save an army whose supreme commander is cut off from reality by his own ego. We didn't lose to their generals. We lost to our own shadow. I watched the red color of the Allies pour over our lines like ink over wet paper. Tomorrow Bayeux will fall. The day after, Cannes. Our divisions will be encircled, destroyed, or forced into a retreat that will never end. This map of France, which we once held so proudly on our walls, now becomes the evidence of our impotence. I see the road that leads directly to Berlin, a road paved with our mistakes and our unawakened headquarters. Today the end began, and we opened the door for it ourselves with our silence. The film ends, but the war continues its bloody dance. On the screen, you see the map of Normandy slowly fading into darkness, while the Allied lines become impenetrable. That was the price of a dream so fragile it could be shattered by a simple human need for sleep. Remember this day not for heroism, but for those critical 8 hours when the world stood on the brink and we chose not to knock on the door. History does not forgive those who sleep while the fate of nations breaks in the sand and blood. The longest day has ended, and a long, dark night for Germany has just begun.